Questions of this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Greens to contribute to this debate on the Residential Tenancies and Housing Legislation Amendment, Public Housing Antisocial Behaviour Bill 2015. While I acknowledge, like the member for Sydney just did, the Minister's work and particularly the visits to public housing areas and most recently to the Red Link opening in the electorate of Newtown, and the real problem that is arising as a result of antisocial behaviour in public housing, it is unfortunate that this bill is coming forward in a way that I don't believe will address the concerns that it is clear that the Minister and all of the members who have spoken in this place recognise are serious concerns about antisocial behaviour in public housing. This bill purports to improve the ability of social housing landlords to manage antisocial behaviour and evict tenants who engage in criminal or other behaviour. There are, however, many problems with this legislation, and that is why the Greens will oppose it. While this bill purports to be a bill assisting to address antisocial behaviour, it instead is discriminating against those living in public housing by creating special rules, different rules, and a different form of treatment for tenants of public housing than those in the community already. We already have laws to deal with issues around criminal behaviour, around antisocial behaviour within our regular legal system, and the need to create special rules or to isolate public housing tenants with a different form of justice is something that we cannot support. The Greens recognise the importance of ensuring safety and wellbeing for all social housing tenants, but this legislation will not improve social housing providers' capacity to address illegal and antisocial behaviours in most cases, and will undermine justice in cases where the tribunal's discretion is removed. We recognise that antisocial behaviour is a huge problem. Since being elected as the member for Newtown, we have had many public housing tenants come and raise serious concerns about issues around antisocial behaviour in public housing areas. I recognise that that is an issue. However, it needs to be recognised that submissions have been made and significant concerns raised about this bill from the Tenants Union, the Law Society, the New South Wales Women's Alliance and Coalition of Community Legal Centres, the Public Interest Advocacy Centre and Communities Legal Centres New South Wales around the concerns that this bill raises in terms of the justice process and the ability for tenants to be able to be treated fairly under this system and the bill that would be described. The specific areas of concern that I will run through briefly that the Greens have and that have been raised by a number of these groups are things that I think need to be taken seriously, and I think are really concerns that seek to put tenants, public housing tenants that are often very vulnerable situations, at more risk, because it is still unclear as to what happens when people are kicked out of this public housing environment. Where do they go then? Where do these people that are most vulnerable go? A big concern that has been raised by many in this place already is the removal of the tribunal's discretion over the termination of leases. Another is the impact of tenants when another occupant has engaged in criminal or antisocial behaviour or conduct. And I draw this House's attention to a story recently of a family that came to see me. There were 3 generations of a family living in a house, the grandparents, the parents, and then the children. One of those children was a teenage son, and that teenage son may or may not, like some teenagers do, dabble in behaviour that maybe parents would prefer they didn't dabble in. They may engage in behaviour that may involve them doing things that would be seen as illegal or would be seen as problematic in terms of this legislation. The reality is that it seems to be that in that circumstance, if the parents were aware that their child may have an issue with an addiction to drugs or may have just been partying a little hard and engaging with something that we wouldn't condone, that their whole family and their tenancy would be put at risk because they would know that their child had been doing that. But which parent in our community would actually discover that their child may have been using illegal substances, may have been found to be growing a bit of pot in a cupboard, and then say, well, actually, you need to be moved out, you need to kick out, because actually what's going to happen is that our housing will be under threat. That's just not something that...
That's the sort of person we're after, someone who's dealing...
What I'm saying is that In these circumstances,
That's not right.
we have a situation where what happens to that family? Is the parents of that child supposed to then take action that would be different to the action we would expect of the compassion of most families and most parents to do when they find out that their child may be doing that kind of thing? We need to recognise, though, that the impact on antisocial behaviour of tenants on the community and on those living in public housing is a huge problem. So we have also the removal of the tribunal's capacity to consider and make determinations based on evidence. We have concerns around the difficult processes for challenging strike notices, and I do note that there has been foreshadowed a move to actually extend the period from 14 days to 21 days. But any of the members here that have been in a situation where they have seen that what happens in relation to public housing tenants, often who are in the most vulnerable of circumstances and relying on community services, on advocates to assist. So many of those clients, many of those public housing tenants don't have access to emails, don't have regular phone numbers that they are able to be accessed by. So the idea of putting time limits that are quite strict and tight on tenants in these circumstances to be able to respond to or challenge strike notices is of serious concern. There is also concern that it appears that tenants cannot dispute the costs of maintenance work, and that's something that we have flagged as well in our concerns and has been flagged by many of the submissions that have been made around this bill. I would like to talk specifically about a case of one constituent that came to me who raised concerns around the impact of antisocial behaviour in a public housing area that he was living in. Because I think it shows the compassion that public housing tenants are willing to show when it comes to dealing with antisocial behaviour. This gentleman came to our office and raised concerns about a neighbour of his that was seriously suffering from mental health issues, was yelling and screaming in the night, clearly had addiction problems and was shouting obscenities. Now, he was nervous about coming to raise this with us because it was impacting on him, because in actual fact, he knew that this woman needed help and support, and he was worried that by raising it she would be evicted or something would happen to her, and he worried that he didn't know where she would go. The question that is not answered in this bill is what happens to these people that are evicted. Where do they go? These are the most vulnerable of vulnerable people, and our public housing service should be there to provide people with a right, which is a right to safe and secure housing. The fact that we are saying that these people are addicted these people are suffering addiction, they are suffering mental health issues, they are dealing in criminal behaviour or antisocial behaviour, but they have not been found, they have been found to be able to be living in public housing. Where do they go? We know that this will put more pressure on community services that deal with crisis accommodation. We know that this will put more pressure on the amount of people sleeping rough on our streets, and I think that this is a serious concern that we need to look at. I also think that it's really important to look that there are other ways to be able to solve these concerns. When we look at Shelter New South Wales' 2012 report, which is called We Look After Our Neighbours Here, that report raised that while tenants in focus groups committed to the fact that there were real concerns around antisocial behaviour and drug and alcohol issues, that those tenants saw the solutions were needed as high levels of support for both the tenants with certain behaviours and those dealing with the behaviours. There was little focus from the tenants on the idea of evicting problem tenants. The Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute in 2007 Good Practice Guide said that disciplinary approaches ignore the effects of poor health, low skills and poverty and on self-esteem and coping skills. They also rely on a threat of eviction for their success, and to be effective the threat must be real. The assumption is that by forcing them into crisis, they will be more responsive to requests to change their behaviour. This argument must be rejected, since the unresponsive tenant faces a genuine risk of eviction and with all of those effects. Shelter New South Wales' 2015 report highlights the need for good support services to address the issues such as mental illness, drug addiction, that are behind much of the antisocial behaviour that we see. It is true that antisocial behaviour in public housing is a real issue, but the Greens cannot support this bill because we do not believe that it takes the necessary steps. Like many in the community that have made submissions while this bill has been debated in this place. We are supportive of the idea of further consultation. We are supportive of the idea of being able to go back and look in detail about how we work with tenants in public housing and with those public housing advocates to come up with solutions that will address the antisocial behaviour needs while ensuring that we don't impose different rights and different forms of justice on those people that live in public housing. The Greens have listened to the community's concerns and the sector's concerns. We acknowledge and say thanks to the Minister and his advisors for providing us with briefings and details on this bill, and we hope that there is an opportunity to work collaboratively to actually address the concerns that are raised by the sector as this bill moves through the House and the other place.